Hi there, my name is Eli Gillespie, and I'm the owner of Gillespie Insurance Services in Redlands, California. Today, we're going to continue our discussion about the business owner's policy, also known as the BOP. In this video, we're going to be talking about the general liability portion of the BOP. I'm going to answer a few questions, a few frequently asked questions, that I hope will give you an understanding of how this coverage works. First, to review, this is our third video on the BOP. Our first video was a general overview, which even gave a hypothetical pricing scenario at the end. You should check it out. Our last video was about the property portion of the BOP. I definitely recommend checking that one out as well because property coverage is, in my opinion, the most complicated part of the BOP. Lastly, before I go over the general liability questions, I'd like to reiterate that a BOP is a package of insurance coverages on one convenient policy. I like to think of it as a value meal at a fast food restaurant. You get a burger, fries, and a Coke all together for less than if you were to buy them a la carte. That's what a BOP is to insurance. All right, so here are the frequently asked questions we get about the general liability portion of the BOP. One, what does general liability actually cover? This is a great question. People buy this policy all day and they have no idea what it covers. And that's what I'm here for. Okay? The main thing that general liability pays for, covers, is losses due to bodily injury and property damage sustained by others that the insured business is deemed responsible for. Okay? So you, the business owner, are held responsible, held liable for someone else's bodily injury or property damage. So the bodily injury or property damage must arise out of the business's operations, products, or the location. The most common example of a loss is if a customer slips and falls on the insured's business premises. If the insured party sued the insured business, the policy will defend the insured. And if it turns out that the insured was negligent and contributed to the loss, the policy will pay up to the full policy limits. So note that I mentioned the policy will pay to defend the insured. So you don't have to be proven to be negligent or proven to be liable for the policy to kick in. You just have to have a claim made against you. The policy will defend. If it turns out you're held liable, it pays. In the meantime, it pays defense costs. So another way to say it is the general liability, the BOP, is your lawyer. Kind of cool. It's worth mentioning that there are other important coverages included on a general liability policy, included within the general liability coverage: personal and advertising injury and medical payments. Now, explaining these coverages is somewhat beyond the scope of this video, mainly because these are not the primary reason a person gets or needs general liability. I will, however, briefly mention that medical payments, which have a lower limit, usually between $1,000 and $5,000, are for no-fault injuries and are not to be confused with the bodily injury claims that would be subject to the full policy limits, which is usually somewhere around $1 million. So let me re-explain that. The policy pays up to the policy limits, which is usually $1 million, if you're held liable. But the policy also typically has med pay, which can pay up to typically 1,000 or 5,000, even if you're not actually liable. So this coverage is meant to pay quickly to the claimant and help the situation go away. It's meant to diffuse injuries from escalating. Okay, second question. What general liability losses aren't covered on a BOP? We call these exclusions, and yes, they exist. There are some things that are not covered on a BOP. Usually about 18 to 20 things are not covered. I'll go over a few of the main ones and summarize the rest. About a quarter of the BOP's liability exclusions are done so because they belong on a separate policy. For example, auto liability, aircraft liability, watercraft liability, workers' comp. These are all excluded on the BOP because they're meant to be covered on separate policies. Most people understand that. I have yet to find someone who was surprised that their employee injury was not covered on the general liability portion of their BOP. So these are kind of known exclusions. People get it. But there are a few other exclusions that's the same thing. The coverage isn't there, but can be purchased, but people aren't quite as aware of that. So one of them is liquor liability, pollution liability, employment practices liability, product recall expense. These are all excluded on a standard BOP. So I don't know if people often don't know that they don't have these coverages, and they're surprised when they find out that these are exclusions. However, most of them, if not all, can be purchased either on the BOP itself as an endorsement or as a standalone separate policy. Okay. There are other situations that are simply excluded and there's no way to get coverage back. That would be expected or intended injury, war. You'll never buy a policy that covers war, damage resulting from war. Actually, war as a liability coverage is kind of odd. That would mean that you caused the war. So you can't get coverage if you go to war with someone. Okay, fine. Intended injury, expected injury. That's kind of interesting because a lot of businesses have bouncers and security guards. If they are defending property and they have to push someone or punch someone or shoot someone, were they expecting or intending injury? Well, that's an interesting question. That exclusion, and we're starting to go into a deep dive here, actually would buy back some coverage, as would the liquor liability buy back some coverage or bring back some situations where there actually is a little bit of coverage in certain situations. But those are exclusions on the policy that you can't get back. You can't get back expected or intended injury if you simply are in the business of hurting people for fun. You can't get insurance for that. Okay, fair enough, right? All right, finally, there is a handful of exclusions meant to prevent your policy from acting as a warranty to fix your product or your work if you had simply made a mistake. All right, so let's say you are a contractor and you build a house and you build it wrong. You did the dimensions wrong. You put the windows in the wrong place. You did something wrong. You didn't do the wall high enough. You put the wrong drywall and whatever. You did it wrong and you have a claim made against you. That's not property damage. And even if it is considered property damage, just fixing that work is not covered. Okay? So sometimes people are surprised to learn about that exclusion, but it's better to know it and learn it and not have insurance surprises. Okay, warning. Sometimes insurance companies add additional exclusions and limitations that eliminate or reduce coverage where you might expect it to apply. Okay, so these are things added. I'm I'm talking about a standard BOP. There's so many BOPs out there. There's hundreds of companies, and they all have a BOP. Insurance companies, they all have a BOP. They all do it in a similar way, and they actually draw off one company that makes insurance contracts. So they generally tend to be very similar. So I can't speak for all insurance companies, but I can speak in general terms, and that's what I'm doing here. So there are situations where additional exclusions and limitations that eliminate or reduce coverage are put in place. Okay, so an example of that would be a prior works exclusion, classification limitation, premise limitations, products and completed operations exclusions. Explaining all these things would make this video very long, as each one of these limitations or exclusions could warrant an entire half-hour video. So it's beyond the scope of this, but I need to mention that because just keep those names in mind. Sometimes you get them, most of the time you don't, but keep those names in mind. Premise limitations, products and completed operations exclusions, classification limitations, prior works exclusions. That one, you don't see that so much in a BOP. That applies to contractors usually, and they don't usually get insured on a BOP, but it's so important I just had to mention it. But it's this reason that we highly recommend that you review your policy or call us and we'll review it for you. Okay, question number 3. If my business decides to offer a new product or service, would losses from those products or services be covered? Well, actually, yes. Fortunately, most BOP policies would cover newly added products or services because they don't have a classification limitation. I spoke about that in question 2 briefly and said I wouldn't explain it, and here I am explaining it. I'm sorry, I'm going to explain it. Classification limitation. That means that you are covered, the standard BOP, you're covered on the general liability portion of the BOP for whatever legal operations you do, even if you add a new one or change your existing operations during the policy period. So that is because the BOP doesn't, the BOP uses your operations to rate the policy. So a restaurant has a rate, a garage, auto shop has a rate, and so on and so forth. Okay, so let's say you run a tire shop and you decide to sell pies on the side, tires and pies. Who would have thought? Would you be covered if a person got sick off one of your rhubarb pies? So, in a standard BOP, most policies would not exclude the loss, meaning you would be covered. Okay? So, if there's a classification limitation, then whichever classification was listed, that would be the only one that you're covered for. Okay? So, you start off as a tire shop and on the rating page it says tire shop and that's it. And then underneath it says we have a classification limitation. That means you're only covered for the tires. Okay. So should you decide to sell pies on the side and a claim happens because of the pie, you get someone sick from your rhubarb, that wouldn't be covered. That's with the classification limitation. So the standard policy, again, does not have classification limitations. However, insurance companies are not at all happy to get a surprise operation that they didn't know about. So, in the event that you are the tire shop and you're thinking of baking some pies and selling those on the side, call your agent, call your insurance company, get that exposure added. So that way, should a claim occur, everyone knows what's going on. Your insurance company isn't shocked to discover that you are now also a baker. All right. Our last question, number 4. What is an additional insured? We call it an AI. And sorry, we coined that term long before artificial intelligence came out. So we've been saying AI first, we have it. When I say AI on a policy, I'm talking an additional insured. Okay, so what is an additional insured or an AI? This is a great question. This is coverage that allows others to be covered on your policy if they are held vicariously liable for your actions that caused bodily injury or property damage. Because remember, that's what general liability covers, bodily injury or property damage. So if someone else gets dragged into a case of yours, they're dragged into it. You did something, the claimant sues you and that guy. If they are listed as an additional insured on your policy, they are covered on your policy. They don't have to use their own insurance, they use your insurance. So, why would you cover that guy on your insurance? Well, there are situations that require it. The most common example of an additional insured is the landlord of the building that your business occupies. So, let's just say you own a store, you own a restaurant, you occupy an office, and a customer comes in and slips and falls. There's a lot more that could happen beyond a slip and fall, but that's just a very common occurrence. So I tend to use that example a lot. But let's say customer comes in, they slip and fall, they hurt themselves, they sue me and my landlord. Okay, so my landlord says, I wasn't responsible for this. I shouldn't have to use my own insurance for what my tenant did when I had no responsibility in my tenant's actions. So that's what the AI does. The landlord says, hey, tenant, if you want to lease from my space here, list me as an AI on your policy. And there we have it. So that's a very common reason for an AI, an additional insured endorsement, landlord. Oftentimes in construction, we have AIs all day. The lower tier contractor, the drywaller, the framer, the tile guy is getting hired by a general contractor. And it is very extremely common for the general contractor to require the subcontractor to list the general contractor on the subs policy as an AI. So that's really all it is. There's a lot of complexity surrounding additional insured endorsements. There's a lot of ways to do it. There are a lot of there's a wide scope of coverages on additional insured endorsements. Some of them being just for situations, ongoing situations now, slip and fall. Some of them will include products. So if I sell a product and later on down the road, someone gets hurt from my product and then they sue me and my landlord, okay, that's an additional insured endorsement, including products. So there's a whole wide variety of additional insured endorsements. But for the most part, keeping it simple, it's really for the ongoing situations. Let's just keep it simple. A slip and fall, the tenant occupant gets sued and they sue the landlord. That's the most common reason why you'll see it. Mortgages, lessors, they often require it too. So there's a whole host of reasons why a BOP would include an AI endorsement. And fortunately, a wide variety of AI endorsements are usually included on the BOP. So when you get a good, robust BOP, rest easy because most likely those most basic and common AI endorsements are included. Okay, I'm not guaranteeing they're included. Don't say that. I said that. So check your policy, check with your agent, check with me. I'll let you know what additional endorsements are included on your policy. And I guess one more final thing is you can have an individual additional insured endorsement. So I'm covering just that landlord, and that landlord will be listed by name on my policy. Or I could have a blanket additional insured, usually endorsement. Usually you have to buy those ones, but a blanket says anyone that you enter into a written contract that requires you to have an additional insured endorsement, why, by golly, this blanket additional insured endorsement will cover that entity with whom you have the written contract. Easy as easy as pie, right? Okay. All right. Well, that's it. Those are the four questions for the general liability portion of the BOP. Okay. Well, before I go, you might be wondering. Well, first, you may be thanking me. Thank you for all your help, Eli. You have really helped me learn about the general liability portion on the BOP. Thank you. How can I work with you in the future? Great question. So, if you would like to do that, just go to our website. The link will be in the below in the thing down there. It's GillespieInsuranceServices.com. Just go to our website, and up here in the upper right, you see Get a Quote. Just click on that, and that takes you to our quoting page. So you just type in your info, as much or as little as you want. Some things are required. Describe your business a little bit, and do the math down here and hit submit. Also, we have a website that talks about the policy, the business owner's policy itself, and there we go. Oh, look, there's my first video. That's kind of cool. So it has a lot of these frequently asked questions that I've answered in this video and previous videos. And right here, just click on request a quote. There you go. It takes you to the same place. And that is how you do it. So we'd love to work with you. Getting a quote with us is not a mandatory purchase. We offer you a quote. You are free to accept it or decline it. We're low pressure. We just want to help you. If it turns out that we've got a great fit for you, awesome. We'll get you covered. If not, that's fine. We maybe next year or maybe never. Maybe we can't help everyone. We help some people. We can't help everyone. So we're just happy to review coverage and really eliminate insurance surprises. That's that's our primary goal here. That's one of our missions. That should be our mission statement. Maybe I'll change it. Anyway, there you go. That's how to get a quote through us, or just reach out and ask questions. Thank you for watching, and I will see you at our next video.